Hey there, Robert John Hadfield here again from Audio Mover, and I've got a really interesting, what I think is going to be a really interesting tape to take a look at today. This is actually a tape that it wasn't purchased blank. This was a tape bought at a store that was produced by a record company, and not often do you get tapes like this that actually are put together, held together with screws. Usually they're sealed shut, so you don't often get to take these apart. And I looked at it, and this is actually a really nice tape. The inside of it is very interesting, and I want to show you how this is put together. This is kind of interesting too, because this is a this is a band called Bad Company, and this was at a strange part in Bad Company's history. You see, Bad Company was actually a supergroup that started way back, I think, in the 70s, and the lead singer was a guy named Paul Rodgers, who had been in a band called Free. If you ever heard the song "All Right Now, Baby," that was Paul Rodgers, and then of course he went on and was in this supergroup Bad Company, and you've heard a bunch of their music before. "Feel Like Making Love." Yeah, anyway, they were really popular. Bad Company was. Well, anyway, Paul Rodgers left at one point to go be in another supergroup, which was called The Firm, which was put together with Jimmy Page. May or may not remember that, but yeah, they had a band called The Firm. Paul Rodgers, Jimmy Page. Paul Rodgers was just an amazing singer. And so he was off doing this work with Jimmy Page, and so Bad Company needed a new singer. And so they found this guy named Brian Howe. Now, Brian Howe, I had actually heard Brian Howe sing before Bad Company, because he was in another band right before Bad Company. I think it was the first thing that he ever did. And I got to tell you something, it was, when I first heard him, I was blown away with the guy's voice. And the album he was on before he joined Bad Company, he was on an album with Ted Nugent. Ted Nugent put out an album called Penetrator, and I bought it I was a Ted Nugent fan. I loved Ted Nugent, and so I saw that he'd put a new album out, and I bought it. And the whole first side of the album, if I'm not mistaken, was all sung by this new guy named Brian Howe. And the first song on Penetrator, I think, was called "Tied Up in Love." "You got me tied up in love, babe." It's a great song. And I mean, and his voice is incredible. And I think the whole second side was Ted Nugent singing. Anyway, so he did this album with Ted Nugent. And then he moved on and he joined Bad Company. And I think he put 4 albums together with Bad Company. And this was one of them, was called Holy Water. And the song Holy Water was actually a hit off of this album. They had a few different hits on this, at least a couple of them. Holy Water, I think Walk on Fire might have been. And If You Needed Somebody, I know that one was, they tried to make that one some sort of, that was one of the singles. So anyway, I'm going to show you what it looks like inside this tape, because once again, this tape has screws and we can take it apart. And I always found it interesting looking inside tape inserts. There it is, Brian Howe right there, vocals. Mick Ralph, Simon Kirk on drums. And so anyway, once again, when Bad Company was first put together, it was a super group. And then when this was put out in the 80s, it wasn't the same. Very different, much more commercial, but once again, Brian Howe's voice, if you've never listened to him sing before, go look up like this song, Holy Water. Go find it on YouTube and just listen to that guy. Or go find Tied Up in Love on the Ted Nugent album, and I think the guy is just absolutely amazing. So anyway, let's take this apart. So this is Bad Company, Holy Water. You'll see like a lot of tapes. Matter of fact, Atco, I think this is their first album on the label Atco. So we're going to take this apart, and like any tape not any, but most tapes that have screws, there's 5 of them. There's one in each corner, and then there's one here in the middle. So we're going to take these screws out. And this one is going to be really unusual when we open it up. If you've watched any of our other videos taking apart cassette tapes, this one is going to be, if I'm seeing it correctly from the outside, which I think I am, this one's going to be really unusual compared to others. This was a totally different kind of way of putting it all together on the inside. You'll see right now that it's rewound to the side B, so it's at the end of side 1 right now. So we've got all the screws out. So now this should just lift off really easily. So I'm just going to set that over to the side. Wow, that's kind of interesting how the whole thing is black. It's unusual to see it this way. And also, interestingly, the leader is this clear blue. A lot of the things that we've looked at, the videos we've made, it's white, and this has kind of a neat look to it, that clear blue. So I'm just going to move this out of the way, because the part that's going to be interesting to us today, I'm going to actually move this whole thing and try not to mess it up too much. I got to remember that that went on that side, or else I'll have the sides backwards. Okay. So what's interesting about this one, when you open it up, it has a lot of the standard things. Of course, it has the pressure pad there. It has the little magnetic shield. But what's different about this one, I don't think that we can actually remove the pressure pad in this. And I'm not sure about that, but I've opened these up before, and they're a little bit different. You'll see that the wheel over here on the side, instead of being a little metal post that just kind of floats in there, this is part of the plastic injection mold. And so it just fits right there, and there's no danger of it falling off like there are with the little metal ones. And I'll try to hold it up at an angle so you can see that, but you'll see this little post right there. And that's what these wheels sit on. Once again, that was part of the plastic injection mold, where a lot of cassette tapes, there's actually just a little piece of metal there that falls off very easily. For some reason, I cannot get this wheel back on. There we go. But watch this. This thing should just lift completely off. Check that out. Check that out. I love this. That's a totally different design, how this whole thing comes apart. So I'm going to set this aside, and we're just going to look at this for a second. So you'll see that it actually has, and these things, you really can't take that out because it has these metal posts. So that holds that pressure pad in place, like that. Then the magnetic shield also, I don't know, I think if I tugged on it hard enough, I might get it out. No, look at that. It's blocked on this side. I wonder if you could push it out. Oh, you can. You can push it out. So that'll actually come out right there. And it looks like in order to get this whole pressure pad out, you'd have to push these posts through. I know that's very different. So I'm going to put this shield back in place. That is really interesting, and it's kind of hard to get it seated in there. It's hard to get it back in. I've never really messed with it on this level, so, oh, this is interesting too. Yeah, anyway, it's kind of, I've never messed with it in this way, so I'm not sure why it won't go in smoothly. It looks like there's a little dimple or something. It's about to make this video really boring. Got it back in. There you go. Anyway, that's kind of a fascinating thing where if let me find another, just kind of another tape maybe from a recent video, and you can kind of see where these match up. So where you have the hole there, those two holes, that matches, basically replaces it. And so instead of making all this stuff part of the plastic injection mold, this piece, which it is in these others, they just make a whole separate unit. And then these obviously got manufactured separate from the tape, or the shell, and then they would just get set in place like that. And you can see that there's this little, I don't know what you call that right there, but this little protrusion? Extrusion? I think it's extruded, or an extrusion. It's part of the plastic injection mold. But you'll see that just fits right over that, and that holds it in place. Kind of amazing. Anyway, it's a unique design for a cassette tape, and this wasn't unique to tapes that were manufactured by whoever manufactured this, because there were tapes you could buy from the store. I think TDK, if I'm not mistaken, it might have been Maxell, actually had a series of tapes that were put together this same way. So it wasn't just these tapes that had been manufactured by for whoever manufactured these tapes to be pre-recorded, obviously, and sold as sold by musicians. I'm just going to look here. This was made in 1990, it says. So, yeah, anyway, thought you might find that interesting. You'll see that these things also have these standard gaskets, which we've talked about before. And you'll notice that there are ridges right here and right there. And what that ridge does, of course, that sits, and I'll put this reel back on so you can kind of get a sense. You'll see that that ridge is kind of up, goes across the tape right there, and it goes across the tape right there. And so what it's doing when the tape is winding onto the reel, that little bit of pressure coming up and the little pressure going down, or basically when it's playing from side to side, keeps it nice and smooth against the when it's winding on the reel. And then it keeps it also from, and then the gasket itself keeps it from rubbing on the plastic of the shell. So anyway, that's how that works. Oh, and this is also interesting how I've shown you other videos how the tape is actually connected to the reel. This one's kind of different too. I want to show you this real quick. I may not take it apart because these can get really, really hard to put back together. But you'll see how the leader tape is connected. You'll see that there's this little bit of white right there. I'm going to scoot this camera in just a little bit tighter. See if we can get that focus so you can see this. You'll see this little bit of white right there. And what that is in a little, basically, hole in the wheel, in the reel itself. And then what you do is the tape actually gets pushed down into that hole, and then that little cylinder, for lack of a better word, gets pushed in there, and it's being held by pressure, and that's what keeps this connected to the reel. See how that works right there? Hopefully you can see that. Like I said, I've shown you other reels where there's a much bigger thing that fits there, and then the tape goes underneath it. In this case, the tape goes right down into that little divot, and then this little tiny white cylinder gets pushed into that place. You can see it from the top right there. See it from the side. I'll kind of spin this around. Hopefully it stays in focus and you can see it well enough. But that's the idea. That's how that works. And that's how the tape stays connected. So this particular tape is kind of unique. There's some really interesting stuff going on with this. So let's try to get this thing put back together now. Now, you can see sometimes dealing with these tapes gets a little bit challenging because this stuff is so flimsy. The leader tape is not very flimsy. It's a lot more solid, but you start getting into the oxide tape and it just starts flipping around, and it gets really, if you're not careful, you can end up with a big pile of tape just all over the place, and getting it wound back on can get really challenging. I'm actually curious if it will tell us what formula this tape is, if it's normal or if it's chrome. The fact that it's such a nice tape makes me think that it might actually be chrome, but it doesn't say. So I don't know. It doesn't say anywhere. All right, so we're going to try. You see what's going on there? How that happens? What I usually do is I kind of hold a finger right over the edge to just kind of hold it in place. And then I'm going to spin it, and little by little we're just going to get this thing, at least all the oxide part of the tape, wound on. This is, in my opinion, kind of the easiest way to do this. It's much easier if you're not dealing with the oxide tape and you're only dealing with the leader, because like I said, the leader tape is much more sturdy, and so it's much easier to work with. You'll actually see right there where this is also interesting. You'll see that the leader and the oxide tape are held together with just a little piece of adhesive, and you can see that adhesive right there. If you flip it over, you can see through the blue side and see it. anyway, you can see the adhesive spanning from the leader tape to the oxide tape. And it's always going to be on the inside. In other words, it's going to be on this side. You'll see how that works right there. Because you shouldn't have that adhesive running across the playhead. Okay. So we're going to get that. So now we have the leader is getting wound on now. And we should be able to get this other side back in place. All right. And once again, like I said, this gets a lot easier to work with. All right. Ooh, it's starting to flip off. There we go. Bad Company. I actually saw these guys. I don't think it was this. It wasn't this tour. It was one. It was I think the tour before this one. I saw them in Denver, Colorado, at the place that was called McNichols Arena, which is long gone, replaced by Pepsi Center. And that's when I saw Brian Howe in concert with Bad Company. Then his voice was so amazing, so great. But they just weren't the same as they were with Paul Rogers. Paul Rogers was just was a phenomenal singer. I sometimes, when I'm saying Paul Rogers, I start saying Roger Waters. Hopefully, at the beginning of this video, I didn't say Roger Waters and think I was saying Paul Rogers. Paul Rogers was a singer for Bad Company. Okay. Anyway, so I've got that back in place. You can see how everything's kind of running where it's supposed to. And now we're going to flip this back over. We'll see if sometimes when you do this gasket thing will fall off as you're putting on. Nope. Stayed in place. Set back on. Real smooth. All right, so we're going to go ahead and put these 5 screws back in. And this tape will now play as if we didn't do anything, because we obviously didn't really do much. But it is interesting to look inside some of these things and see the slight differences in how these things are put together. And these when they made those in separate pieces were a little more advanced than some of the older cassettes in how they put these together. So we're almost done here. And where did my other... There it is. We actually have a bag full of about 1,000 of these little screws in case we lose them. So anyway, hope you enjoyed that. This is Bad Company's Holy Water tape. We got to take a look on the inside. And of course, if you find these videos interesting, please subscribe to the channel, leave your comments. We'd love to hear from you. And of course, the company I'm with is Audio Mover. So if you have old audio and video tapes you need to convert to digital, go to audiomover.com and we can help you out with that stuff. And with that, have a fantastic day.